Welcome to Monday, August 16th live Q&A on baby and child sleep. So this is your opportunity to ask me anything you want to ask me about your child's sleep. What I am going to do today though is I'm going to talk a little bit about nurseries because most people will send their child to a nursery, to a childminder or something like that, and it can actually be a complete and utter minefield as to what you're going to be looking at, what to ask, what's important to you. So I just think it's really good to actually have a little talk about this, really. It kind of came to mind because today was Alicia's first settle at nursery. And oh man, I was there and I'm going, how's this going to go? Is she going to cry? Because she's hit that super clingy bit at the moment where she's like mega clingy. And I'm thinking, is she going to cry her eyes out? Is it going to be really horrible? And we got there, and obviously with the way nurseries are at the moment, you can't even go in. So it's like hand over at the door. So I thought, right, well, rather than do that, I'll put her down and let her walk in. And I'm there and I'm tentatively thinking, how's this going to go? Sofia's there as well because I had to take her to holiday club. And I'm going, it's going to go. And she just walked in. She literally just waltzed in, happy as Larry, let them take her up upstairs. And that was it. And I picked her up. She waved bye to me. And when I picked her up, they said she'd done nothing but smile the whole hour that she'd been there for this settle. When the nursery worker told her that Mummy was here, she literally turned around to everyone and went, bye to everybody and waltzed off. It's like, well, she's fine. But I absolutely am fully aware that that's not how it is for everybody. It wasn't like that with Sofia, and it isn't like that for most, I don't think. Obviously, I think a lot of it is circumstances, preparation, understanding and things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first things you'd want to think about is when you're going to nursery, what's on your priority list? What are the important things that you want to get out of nursery? Is location your priority? Is what they eat your priority? Is the sleep your priority? What are these things that are really important to you? Do you want it that they just follow the crowd? Do you want them to take them out a lot? Do you want them to be listening to what you want them to say? What you're telling them to do? How much of a role do you want to play? How much of an active role do you want to play in your child's life, really, when it comes to going to nursery? So it's just having that list of what's your ideal? What do you actually really want? Because it can actually be quite disheartening sometimes when you think you found somewhere, you go and see it and it isn't really quite what it's shaped up to be. It's not really quite what you thought it would be. So just to give you a bit of an idea, this first one that Sofia went to, I got the vibe straight away from going in that it was absolutely spot on. I'd only looked at 2 nurseries. The first one was very... It made me very nervous in the sense that I just waltzed in when they eventually let me through. There was nobody to greet me. There was the buggies all there. There was no members of staff. I could have literally waltzed anywhere I wanted to go throughout the nursery. And that for me went, security, nah, that's not for me. The next place I went to, which Sofia did end up going to, everything felt absolutely spot on about it. And Sofia was happy and we were going round and everything seemed great. This time around, things are a bit different. And I think this is the same for anybody that's got an older child, because especially one that's in school, because your second child has to fit with your current situation. So we're not in a position where we could say, Alicia, you can go to the same nursery as Sofia did, because it's a 10-15 minute drive away, which is no good when we've got the school run in the morning. So your priorities naturally change. And your first, you will find that you want the or singing or dancing. It has to be absolutely perfect. It has to be Ofsted outstanding. Everything about it tends to have this wow factor. And when you have your second, as much as you think, yes, it has to have that, realistically, if it's going to fit in with your circumstances, it might not be possible. So again, your expectations have to change ever so slightly, and thinking about what it is that you actually want. out of it. So for me, my initial thought was location. We've got a nursery at the bottom of the street. Reviews seemed pretty good online. It was on the way to nursery, on the way to school. Hours seemed great. I could drop off on the way to school, pick up on the way home from school. It seemed absolutely perfect. Now, obviously with COVID, which is the same for so many of you at the moment, you don't get the same opportunities. You don't really get to go and look, and you can't just go in and have a look around as and when you want to. Everything's much more clinical in a way and structured, and it has to be at certain times, maybe when there's no children around. So you don't actually see the children in their environment. But for me, I thought somebody I knew, child went to this particular nursery, and I went, yeah, that'll do for me. It's on the way to school. It's absolutely fine. No problems. I eventually went to look, and it was not for me. Maybe that felt like I was a snob, but it was just, there was too many factors that didn't fit with what I wanted. So for example, I could smell the nappy bin. You don't really want that while your kids are playing. You know, the sleep side of things, it just didn't, you know, I was like, well, they're sleeping in a situation where, you know, they're going to put them just there, and it's still quite light, and they're not really, nothing felt like it would accommodate. And it basically, I walked out sort of with a bit of a sinking feeling, to be honest with you, and had to start again. So again, looking around for different nurseries. Again, you want one that's got communication with you. So there was one that was supposedly fully booked, but it took ages to actually get to that point because you couldn't get the correspondence from them. They wouldn't reply to emails quickly. And again, these are things to consider, because you need to know that if your little one is going to a nursery, that they're going to get back to you if you need something. If you've got a question, you want them to get back to you, you know, quickly, if you're not sure about something. So again, if they're not looking to get your business as such, if they're not replying at the beginning stages, again, for me, that doesn't bode well for the future. So again, that was one where it's like, well, what do you want? So then it came down to two others. So I took Sofia with me, with Alicia as well, to two of these nurseries, which was brilliant, and they were complete worlds apart. And this is when I say, you know when it's the right place, and you know what's going to fit your situation. So there's lots of different things you want to consider when you're looking at a nursery. So you want to consider where the location is. Well, both of them were the same sort of distance, but one was easier to walk, one not, due to the way the traffic is. One of them is term time only, which is again something that you might not realise when you put your little one in nursery. So things like, if you're looking at part-time, you might want to avoid Mondays because there are 8 bank holidays in a year. And guess what? You pay for all the bank holidays, even if they're not in. So you might want to avoid Mondays as your set day, and you might put set days as somewhere else. And if you need Mondays, you might just do, you know, the occasional Monday, or just book them in for the Mondays rather than set your routine for your paying for Mondays. That's just a really helpful tip, by the way, because it's not cheap sending kids to nursery. So things like that. And if you've got children in school, you might not actually want them to be in 52 weeks a year. You might only want them to be in at school time, in which case you want to find one that's got term time only as an option. It makes a huge difference on the cost. And also, you're not then tied to thinking, I've got to send them because I'm paying for it. Oh, you know, 70 quid a day or whatever it might be at certain places, which is, you know, what it was at my last place. Scary money. You know, so sometimes you feel like you should be sending them because you've still got to pay the money. So again, consider whether it's term time only. Some places will have certain numbers of places that are term time only, and they might choose to say, right, you pay a retainer, so you might have to pay for 1 day a week of the non-term time days. So these are things to ask when you're actually going. If you want term time only, make sure that they've got it and it fits with what your budget is and your situation is. The other things is what your drop-off times are and your pick-up times, because again, you want that to fit where the meal times are and where the sleep times are. Okay, now this is kind of really important because your meal times and your sleep times tie in quite well, because you tend to find a lot of babies, I say a lot, most babies, between 15 and 18 months, they start to transition from 2 naps a day to 1 naps a day. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. but I'm going to just use this as the mealtime thing. Most babies tend to, because of the time they generally wake up in the morning, they tend to nap if they've got a 7 o'clock bedtime from about 11:30 through till about 2 o'clock. A nice 2.5 hour nap in the middle of the day. This 2 hour nap can actually go on till they're about, they don't tend to drop down to 2 hours till they're about 2 years old. So it's there for a long time. Find out when nursery do their lunch. What I've found from experience, both as a mum with a child in a nursery and as a sleep consultant, working with a lot of families that have got children in nursery, if you're finding that lunch is sitting around 11:30, that tends to, especially 12 o'clock, I've actually seen it at 12 before, that can actually cause quite a few issues with the sleep. Because if your little one is ready for a nap and they're being forced to stay awake because they can't have their lunch till later, they might be too tired to eat. They might not then nap too well because they're actually overtired by the time they get to sleep. They might actually put up a fight. They might sleep too late if you're in that situation where, if they decide that actually they'll let them sleep as long as they want to, if they haven't got that cut-off time. A lot of places have 2 o'clock as a cut-off, maybe 2:30 for waking them. But again, that then potentially can cause you problems then at bedtime. Twofold. If your little one doesn't go down for a nap till about 12:30 and they're needing 2.5 hours and they're up at 2, they're probably going to need a bit of an early night to catch up, but they're probably not going to be ready to go really early because they need to still build up enough sleep pressure, but they're possibly overtired because they've probably been awake for far too long in the morning. So again, it's finding that nice balance. The ones I find work really well where they do lunch around 11ish and they start working towards getting them down for naps between 11:30 and 12. That tends to work really quite nicely. Unless you're in a situation where your wake up time is generally later and your bedtimes are generally later, then you might be fine with a later meal time and obviously then a later nap. But make sure you're asking these questions in advance because you'll know where your child's body clock is sitting. If you have a 6:30 waker, they're going to struggle with a 12:30 nap. Okay? These are just a few things to consider. The other thing with regards to the the sleep, is how they go about the nap transition and how these babies are sleeping. Because one of the things that I've come across regularly, this isn't occasionally, this is like nearly all of the time, because of the way that the rooms tend to be split within nurseries or the way that it's easier for them to accommodate, I tend to find that a lot of nurseries push the little ones onto one nap earlier than they're able to actually do it, than they're normally ready to do it. So I see it a lot of time from 12, 13 months, they start nursery. It suits the nursery easier because they're doing lunch at 11 o'clock, maybe 11:30. It suits the nursery easier to get all the children down for a nap at the same time, rather than this baby needs a nap at this time, this baby needs a nap at this time. They're all sort of sitting around different times because we've got a 12-month-old that still needs a nap at 9 o'clock and we've got some 18-month-olds aren't going down at this till this time. And it suits their situation easier. So they tend to push a little bit earlier than what most of us would like, and especially what your baby would like. So what you want to make sure is that you know what your child needs, you are aware, and you can say to them, this is the situation with my child's naps. How do you accommodate? They are needing 2 naps a day. They still need 2 naps a day. They tend to go down at this time. How is that going to fit into your routine? Be understanding, because at the end of the day, it's not easy for them. I'm not trying to slate nurseries at all. They do an absolutely incredible job at looking after our children. But at the same time, the last thing we need is a really overtired, cranky baby coming home up all night because they're absolutely knackered, because they probably had an hour's sleep somewhere in the middle of the day. They've cried an awful lot. And nobody ends up in a happy situation at this point. So it's just about trying to make sure that they can accommodate what it is that you're needing from them as well, and what your baby is needing. And that's the most important thing. If they have something that they need from home, like a specific comforter, are they okay to take that in with them? How do they deal with things like dummies? Ask again, and this is not to do with sleep, ask again things like what water cups they use, what water bottles they use, because again, it might not be the sort of thing that your child uses, and you might think, do you know what, I'll send my own cup in because that's what they're used to. It's how accommodating they are, what things hit on your tick list, okay? So this is all kind of happening. You want to make sure you've got your bag ready with all your different spare clothes on, ready for when they actually start nursery. You'll probably tend to find, you'll probably put about 3 or 4 spare pairs of clothes in there when they're ready to start nursery. So these, it sounds daft, but honestly, the food that they put down themselves, the drinks that they spill down themselves, you could, you know, wee accidents, whatever it might be, you know, you can pick them up at the end of the day and suddenly find that actually they've gone through 3 pairs of clothes. So always make sure you've got a bag with all the different, you know, sorts of spare clothes in there for them as well, right? Make sure you've got raincoats, make sure you've got wellies. It's ready for when they go outside. These are just considered. Make sure you put the names on everything. You'll find you get to the point where they've got settles. So let them go for the settles. And the thing to be really careful of here is to make sure that you're not anxious and you're okay with it, because your baby will always pick up on your mood, okay? If you're feeling anxious, if you're standing there, if you're kind of going, oh, I don't want to leave my baby, which by the way, you won't want to. It's oh, that feeling of I'm handing my baby over to someone I don't know. I'm handing them over and I'm leaving them for the first time. That feeling is but that's not a feeling that you want to portray. That's not a feeling that you want to show to your little ones. I promise you that. You want to be very quite blasé about it. If you can't go in, especially as it is at the moment with COVID, if you can't go in and you are at the drop-off, really try and be quite chilled out. Try and get them in beforehand if you can, so they can have a look round, meet the people. And that's not necessarily a settle. That can just be as you're just trying to pick in your nursery and you're just having a look round a few places. And like I say, we got Sofia involved as well, and we got her to help pick which nursery she felt was going to be the best. Like I say, we've gone for the one that's just, it just seems lovely. It just seems really nice. And it doesn't have the whole preschool thing because I've already planned ahead for the future on that one. But just know what you're looking for. Have your questions, do your research, know what are your priorities, what things you can live with, what things you absolutely cannot live with. Make sure you've got a few places that you want to look at, and don't settle for one. Don't make sure you've had a good look and they all suit. Make sure you've asked your questions and know that they can accommodate your baby, especially when it comes to sleep, because that is the biggest thing by far that I see is a massive, big detrimental effect on sleep. So babies might sleep absolutely fine. They start nursery. Next thing you know, I've got people coming to me going, they slept absolutely fantastic. And I go, right, let's just work back. What has happened? And 9 times out of 10, where it's gone wrong is when they've actually gone to nursery and they've been pushed onto one nap. And they think that their baby's handling it absolutely fine because they're coping at the beginning. And then suddenly that sleep debt builds and there's a bit of a deficit there, and then they become more overtired, and eventually you end up with early rising, and they still happen to be on one nap at nursery. You then end up with multiple night wakings, and it all feeds into each other. And then next thing you know, you're contacting somebody like myself going, my baby just won't sleep anymore, what do I do? And a lot of the time it's because they've gone to one nap too early, because the situation has pushed for it, okay? So see how important it is for you. If it's a really important thing that they follow what you need, make sure that they've got places to accommodate sleep at the times that you need it to be there. I hope you found this bit helpful. So I'm going to open it up now to questions. So if any of you have got any questions on